somewhere upstream of where you are sitting right now, there is a very good chance that a wall of earth or concrete is holding back a body of water, quietly, invisibly, the way it has for decades. You probably never think about it. Most people never do. Dams are part of the forgotten infrastructure of the country, structures we drive past without noticing, that hold back the lakes we fish in and the reservoirs we drink from, that have stood so long and so silently that we simply assume they will stand there forever. But across America, there are thousands of these structures that carry a designation that ought to make everyone downstream pay attention. They are rated high hazard, and there are around 4,000 of them. And the question that hangs over every single one of them is a simple and deeply unsettling one that few people ever stop to ask. Is yours downstream? Before we go any further, it is critically important to understand exactly what that phrase, high hazard, actually means, because it is one of the most misunderstood terms in the entire field of infrastructure. And misunderstanding it leads people to either dismiss the danger or panic about the wrong thing. A high hazard rating does not mean that a dam is in bad condition. It does not mean the dam is about to fail, or that it is poorly built, or that it is crumbling. The hazard classification has nothing to do with the physical state of the structure at all. Instead, it refers entirely to the consequences that would follow if the dam were to fail. A dam is rated high hazard when its failure would likely cause loss of human life. That is the definition. It is a measure of what is at stake downstream, not a measure of how likely the dam is to break. This distinction is everything, and once you grasp it, the picture becomes both clearer and, in a way, more sobering. A brand new, perfectly maintained, structurally flawless dam can be rated high hazard simply because there are homes and roads and people in the path that the water would take if it ever escaped. The rating reflects geography and development, the presence of a population living below the dam in the floodplain that the reservoir would inundate if the structure gave way. So when we say America has around 4,000 high-hazard dams, we are not saying America has 4,000 dams on the verge of collapse. We are saying America has around 4,000 dams whose failure would put human lives at risk. 4,000 places where the water held back is enough, and the people downstream are numerous enough that a failure would be a catastrophe. But here is where the real concern enters the picture, because while the high hazard rating is about consequences rather than condition, there is a separate and deeply troubling reality about the condition of many American dams, and when the two overlap, you have the makings of genuine danger. A significant number of the nation's dams are old, many of them built generations ago, designed for the conditions and the standards of a different era, and they are aging. Like any structure, a dam does not last forever. Over the decades, the materials degrade, the earth settles, the concrete cracks, the mechanisms wear, and without diligent maintenance and periodic upgrades, a dam can slowly deteriorate from a sound structure into a deficient one. And a substantial portion of the country's dams have indeed been found to be deficient in one way or another, in need of repair or rehabilitation to bring them up to safe standards. The truly alarming situation arises where these two factors intersect, where a dam is both high hazard, meaning its failure would cost lives, and deficient, meaning it is not in the condition it needs to be to safely do its job. There are, across the country, a significant number of dams that fall into exactly this category, structures that are both dangerous in their consequences and compromised in their condition, and these represent the sharpest edge of the nation's dam safety problem. It is one thing to have a high-hazard dam that is well-maintained and sound, where the rating simply reflects the population downstream. It is quite another to have a high-hazard dam that is also deficient, where the potential for catastrophic loss of life meets a structure that may not be able to withstand the forces it was built to hold. This overlap is where the danger truly lives, and it is far more common than most people realize. To understand how the country arrived at this point, you have to understand the history of America's dams. Many of them were built during a great era of dam construction that stretched across the middle of the last century and before, a period when the nation was busy taming its rivers, creating reservoirs, generating power, and controlling floods. Dams were built by the tens of thousands, by governments and companies and private landowners, for every purpose, from water supply to recreation to flood control to industry. They were built to the standards of their time, with the knowledge and the materials and the assumptions available then. And then, having been built, many of them were largely forgotten, left to do their work quietly while the attention of the nation moved on to other things. The result is that a huge share of the country's dams are now old, many of them well past the age for which they were designed, aging structures built long ago and now carrying the weight of decades. Compounding the problem of age is the problem of changing circumstances, because the world downstream of these dams has not stood still. When many of these dams were built, the land below them was often empty, rural, undeveloped, so that even if the dam failed, few people would be harmed. But over the decades, the country grew, and development spread into the floodplains below the dams, as homes and businesses and roads were built in the very areas that a dam failure would inundate. A dam that was once low hazard, because nothing lay downstream, can become high hazard over time, not because the dam changed, but because people moved into the path of the potential flood. This creeping development below the dams has steadily increased the number of high-hazard structures, putting more and more people in harm's way, often without their knowledge, as they settle into communities that lie below aging dams they may not even know exist. There is also the challenge of the changing climate and the changing patterns of weather, which pose a growing threat to the safety of these aging structures. Many dams were designed to handle a certain magnitude of flood, the largest flood expected under the conditions known at the time of their construction. But as the climate shifts and the patterns of precipitation change, some regions are experiencing more intense rainfall and larger floods than were anticipated when the dams were built. A dam designed for the floods of a previous era may find itself confronting floods that exceed its capacity, and this is one of the most dangerous scenarios in dam safety, because the overtopping of a dam. When water flows over the top of a structure not designed to withstand it, is a leading cause of dam failure. The combination of aging structures and intensifying floods is a serious and growing concern, one that threatens to push already vulnerable dams past their limits. To appreciate why all of this matters so much, it helps to understand what actually happens when a dam fails. Because the failure of a dam is one of the most sudden and catastrophic events in the entire realm of infrastructure disasters. A dam holds back an enormous quantity of water that under normal conditions is contained and controlled. When a dam fails, that containment is lost, and the stored water is released all at once, or nearly so, surging downstream in a wall of water that can move with astonishing speed and force. This is not a gradual flood that rises slowly and gives people time to escape. It is a sudden, violent release, a torrent that can sweep away everything in its path, destroying homes, tearing apart infrastructure, and giving those downstream little or no warning. The suddenness is what makes a dam failure so deadly, because people may have only minutes or less to react before the water reaches them. The scale of a dam failure depends on the size of the dam and the quantity of water it holds, but even a relatively modest dam can unleash a devastating flood if it fails, and the largest dams hold enough water to inundate vast areas and threaten enormous numbers of people. The water release does not simply flood the land in an orderly way. It arrives as a powerful surge, carrying debris, moving with tremendous energy, capable of sweeping away vehicles and buildings and anything else in its path. The destruction can extend for miles downstream, following the course of the river valley, spreading out across the floodplain, reaching communities that may lie a considerable distance below the dam. And because the release is so sudden, the warning time is often minimal, leaving those in the path with little opportunity to flee. This is why the failure of a high-hazard dam is such a grave concern, because it combines enormous destructive power with the potential for a catastrophic loss of life. It is worth understanding, too, the ways that dams actually fail. Because a dam can give way through several distinct mechanisms, and knowing them illuminates why aging and deficient structures are so vulnerable. One of the most common is overtopping, which occurs when more water enters the reservoir than the dam can safely pass or hold, so that the water rises over the top of the structure. For an earthen dam made of packed soil, this is especially dangerous because the flowing water erodes the material, cutting a channel that rapidly widens as more water pours through, until the dam is breached and the reservoir escapes. This is why the intensifying floods of a changing climate are such a threat, because they raise the risk of overtopping in dams that were never designed for such large flows. Another major mechanism is internal erosion, sometimes called piping, in which water seeping through or under the dam slowly carries away the soil from within, creating hidden channels that grow over time until the structure is fatally weakened and collapses. This process can unfold invisibly inside the dam, giving little warning before the failure comes. There are also failures caused by structural problems, by the deterioration of the materials, by the failure of the mechanisms that control the release of water, and by the movement of the earth beneath the dam. Each of these mechanisms is made more likely by age and neglect, because a well-maintained dam is inspected for exactly these warning signs and repaired before they become critical, while a deficient dam may harbor these developing failures unseen. This is the deeper reason that the condition of a dam matters so much, because the mechanisms of failure often develop gradually, and the difference between a dam that fails and one that does not is frequently the difference between one that is monitored and maintained and one that is left to deteriorate on its own. History offers grim reminders of what dam failures can do. Over the years, there have been dam failures that killed large numbers of people, disasters that stand as sobering warnings of the danger these structures can pose. These events, when they have occurred, have often come as terrible surprises, striking communities that had lived below their dams for years without incident, that had come to see the dam as a permanent and harmless part of the landscape, right up until the moment it failed. The suddenness and the horror of these disasters have periodically shocked the nation into paying attention to dam safety, prompting efforts to inspect and repair and regulate the dams. But the attention has tended to fade, and the underlying problem, the vast inventory of aging dams, has persisted, so that the danger remains, quietly waiting. So who is responsible for keeping these dams safe, and why has the problem been allowed to grow? The answer is complicated, because the responsibility for the nation's dams is fragmented among a great many owners and overseers. Dams are owned by a wide array of entities, by federal and state and local governments, by companies, by utilities, by private individuals and associations. Many dams are privately owned, and the responsibility for maintaining them and keeping them safe falls on their owners, who may or may not have the resources, the knowledge, or the will to do so properly. The oversight of dam safety is largely a responsibility of the states, and the capacity of the states to inspect and regulate their dams varies considerably. The result is a patchwork of ownership and oversight, in which many dams receive inadequate attention, in which some owners lack the means to maintain their structures, and in which the sheer number of dams overwhelms the resources available to inspect and regulate them all. The cost of fixing the problem is a major obstacle, because rehabilitating a deficient dam is expensive, often enormously so, and the total cost of bringing the nation's deficient dams up to safe standards is staggering. For many dam owners, particularly the smaller and private ones, the cost of the necessary repairs is simply beyond their means, leaving deficient dams unrepaired because no one can afford to fix them. The funding available for dam safety from public sources falls far short of what would be needed to address the full scope of the problem. And so the deficient dams persist, their needed repairs deferred year after year, the risk accumulating, because the money to fix them cannot be found. This is one of the central reasons the problem has grown so large, the mismatch between the enormous cost of the needed work and the limited resources available to do it. Given all of this, the question in the title becomes deeply personal and genuinely important. Is your home downstream of a high-hazard dam? For a great many Americans, the answer is yes, whether they know it or not. Millions of people live in the areas below the nation's dams, in the floodplains that would be inundated if those dams failed, and many of them have no idea. They have never thought about the dam upstream, never considered that their home lies in its shadow, never imagined that their safety depends on a structure they may not even know exists. This lack of awareness is itself a serious problem, because people who do not know they are at risk cannot prepare for it, cannot advocate for the maintenance of the dam, cannot plan for the possibility of its failure. The invisibility of the danger is part of what makes it so insidious. There are steps that individuals can take to understand and reduce their own risk. And the first of them is simply to find out. Information about dams and their hazard ratings is, in many cases, available to the public, and people can learn whether they live downstream of a dam and what its rating and condition are. Knowing that you live below a high-hazard dam is the first step toward taking the risk seriously, toward understanding the emergency plans that may exist for the dam, toward knowing the evacuation routes and the warning systems, toward being prepared to act quickly if the worst should happen. Awareness does not eliminate the risk, but it transforms it from an invisible danger into a known one that can be planned for and guarded against. And that transformation can be the difference between safety and catastrophe if a dam ever fails. Beyond individual awareness, the larger solution lies in a renewed national commitment to the safety of the nation's dams, a recognition that this forgotten infrastructure demands attention and investment before disaster strikes rather than after. This means devoting the resources needed to inspect the dams regularly, to identify the deficient ones, and to repair or remove them. It means strengthening the oversight of dam safety, ensuring that all dams, regardless of ownership, receive the scrutiny they require. It means helping the owners who cannot afford the necessary repairs to fund them so that deficient dams do not remain unrepaired for lack of money. And in some cases, it means removing dams that are no longer needed or that cannot be economically brought up to standard, eliminating the hazard entirely by taking down the structure and letting the river run free. The removal of obsolete and dangerous dams is, in many cases, the best solution, resolving the risk permanently while often restoring the health of the river. There is a particular urgency to all of this because the problem is not static but growing, worsening with each passing year as the dams age further, as more development spreads into the floodplains below them, and as the changing climate brings more intense floods. The inventory of aging dams does not get younger. The structures built generations ago grow older and more vulnerable with time. And the backlog of needed repairs grows larger as more dams fall into disrepair faster than the deficient ones can be fixed. Every year that the problem is neglected, the risk increases. The number of high-hazard deficient dams potentially grows, and the day of the next major failure draws closer. The window for addressing the problem proactively, before catastrophe forces the issue, is not unlimited, and the longer the nation waits, the harder and more expensive the problem becomes to solve. It is worth pausing to reflect on the strange invisibility of this entire issue, because dams are perhaps the clearest example of infrastructure that we take completely for granted until the moment it fails. We see the lakes and reservoirs the dams create, and we enjoy them. But we rarely think about the structures holding the water back. We build our homes below them without a second thought. We assume, without ever really deciding to assume it, that the dam will always hold, that it is someone's job to keep it safe, that the water will stay where it belongs. And most of the time, that assumption holds true, because the great majority of dams do not fail. And the ones that are well maintained and carefully monitored can stand safely for a very long time. But the assumption is not always safe, and the 4,000 high-hazard dams, and especially the ones among them that are also deficient, are a reminder that the water behind the dam is held back only by a structure, and that structures, if neglected, can fail. The story of America's high-hazard dams is, in the end, a story about the choices we make regarding the infrastructure that quietly sustains and protects us. We built these dams for good reasons, and they have served us well, providing water and power and flood control and recreation for generations. But the structures that provide these benefits also carry risks, and those risks demand ongoing attention, investment, and care. To neglect the dams, to let them age and deteriorate without maintaining them, is to gamble with the lives of the millions of people who live downstream, to trust that the aging structures will hold without giving them the care they need to do so. The 4,000 high-hazard dams are a call to take that responsibility seriously, to invest in the safety of this forgotten infrastructure before the next failure reminds us, in the most tragic way possible, of what is at stake. So the question remains, and it is worth asking directly: Is your home downstream of a high-hazard dam? It is a question worth answering, because the answer may affect your safety in a way you have never considered. And it is a question that, multiplied across the millions of Americans who live below the nation's dams, points to a larger truth, which is that the safety of these structures is not someone else's problem, but a shared national responsibility, one that touches the lives of a great many people, most of whom have no idea that a wall of earth or concrete upstream is all that stands between them and the water it holds back. The dams have held for a very long time, quietly and faithfully, but they cannot hold forever without care. And the time to give them that care is now, before the water finds a way through, and the forgotten infrastructure